Hello, everyone. The presentation you're going to hear is from my last book, which was published at the beginning of the year. It's called La Mystification Patriarcale. And it's about the myth of the uncontrollable urge, sexual urge of men. The argument of the uncontrollable sexual urge is a classic stereotype of the discourse that justifies and excuses male violence. If it's only about answering the question, are male sexual urges really uncontrollable? The answer is obvious. No, they are not, because unless they are mentally deranged or drunk, men don't rape women when the circumstances are not appropriate and if they are not almost sure of impunity. They don't rape in public places, whether in supermarkets, at work, surrounded by colleagues, in a crowded street, etc. Please, slide 1. Rapists act only after evaluated the risks versus the chances of success. There must be no witnesses around unless they are accomplices. The target must be in a weakened state, ideally under the influence of alcohol or drugs, etc. If the risk is too big, no action is taken. The argument of the uncontrollable urge is valid also in the case of domestic violence. The men who say they cannot refrain from hitting their wife can control their anger when they are mad at their boss. If men can control their sexual urge when they are in public, they can control it in private. Rape is not the consequence of an urge, but the result of a calculation, if not a strategy. What feminists must analyze more in depth is the role that this argument plays in patriarchal discourse and in the patriarchal system, and the message it conveys about male sexuality. To assert that male urges are uncontrollable is first and foremost a paradoxical statement. It suggests, on one hand, that these urges are very dangerous, antisocial, even criminal, while implying, on the other hand, that they cannot or must not be repressed. It's bad, but nothing can be done about it. Boys will be boys. So it's out of the question to really punish rape, incest, and pedophilia. The only response that society considers appropriate is to channel these urges towards marriage and prostitution, which, according to the traditional patriarchal discourse, should exist precisely to protect pure women, wives, and daughters from rape. This is a spurious argument, as not only there has been never been any proof of this so-called reduction of the number of rapes by prostitution, but on the contrary, statistics indicate that it is in countries where prostitution is legal that rates of male sexual violence are highest. And most of all, prostitution is rape. John pays to rape a woman, so it's nonsensical to pretend that prostitution reduces rape. In any case, there is no other crime of which the dominant discourse says it's a crime that should not be punished, it's an acceptable crime. What's more, it's patriarchal men who describe themselves as predators and would-be sexual criminals. It's masculinity itself they present as wild and predatory. They add that one should not even try to repress their sexual urges because that would be impossible. These urges are natural, biological, hormonal, and one cannot go against nature. The paradox is also that the dominant discourse says both these urges cannot be controlled and should not be controlled. It can be both. It's contradictory. What's more, slide 2, please. This discourse represents these urges as absolute physiological necessities like eating, drinking, and sleeping, whose satisfaction is imperative under the penalty of death. Men like to pretend that the non-satisfaction of their sexual urges is painful, the blue ball syndrome, and would result in physical wasting, psychological problem, and depression. This assimilation of male sexual desires to vital needs is received as such an evidence that it even justifies the creation of sexual services. In other words, the free use of prostitutes paid for by taxpayers for invalid males. In this argument justifying the provision of free prostitutes for invalid males, the male sexual urge is not just naturalized, it's medicalized as part of proper health maintenance for men. Like we are told that, to eat 5 vegetables and fruit daily. Who could refuse free sexual services to a suffering male, as they would be sort of prescribed to him for medical reasons? This argument of the uncontrollable urge operates the naturalization of a social construct. Male desire is naturalized as an imperative physiological need to give it an undisputable evidence. As a general rule, the dominant classes naturalize the founding elements of their dominance to hide its historicity and to make it appear unchangeable. Who, confronted to such an obvious healthcare necessity, would dare to mention that ejaculation is not a vital need and that no man ever died from chastity? And even if one admits the scientifically dubious hypothesis that a man must regularly empty his testicle to stay in good health, any man can do it himself unless his hands have been amputated. But men consider that masturbation is not good enough. In order to stay in good health, they have to ejaculate in bodily orifices, and not any kind of orifices, not masculine orifices. Only female orifices will do. Although males possess bodily orifices, it's not admissible for heterosexual men to relieve themselves in male orifices. Only female orifices are sexualized, male orifices are out of bounds. Slide 3, please. On Facebook, a man spoke of vagina sanctuarization to strike back against feminists who denounced marital duty. This meant that, according to him, wives should not make such a fuss when they must submit to unwanted marital sex. In fact, if there are bodily orifices that are sanctuarized, it's not the vagina to which men can access in countless ways, through marital duty, prostitution, pornography, rape, incest, and pedocriminality. It's the bodily orifices of heterosexual men whose refusal to get penetrated is as obsessive as their desire to penetrate women in all ways possible. The notion of uncontrollable urge is used first and foremost to relieve men of any responsibility. Through it, men say, no matter what we do, as atrocious sexual crimes we commit may be, we should not be held responsible. It's not us, it's our urges. It's the testosterone. The added bonus is that the responsibility of these urges can be projected on women and girls, presented as teases and temptresses with seductive behavior causes males involuntary erections. More importantly, there is an implicit threat present in the notion of uncontrollable urge. If these wild and dangerous urges that can be directed towards all sorts of women were not satisfied, they would threaten the social order itself. There is a fantasy of hordes of men prowling the streets, assaulting sexually any female that would come across, including respectable women, lashing out at other dominant properties, thus endangering the male solidarity that cements patriarchy. The satisfaction of these urges is therefore presented as imperative in order to maintain law and order in society. As underlined, the only thing society can do is to channel these urges toward acceptable outlets so they don't disrupt the social order too much, which of course implies that women, in particular certain categories of women, should resign themselves to satisfy these urges. It's useless to resist, submit to men's right to sexual access. It's the way nature wants it. Men deprived of the legitimate satisfaction of their sexual needs would run amok and create chaos, so get over it. Your unavoidable destiny is to be penetrated. Anatomy is destiny, Freud said that. But in fact, the assertion that male urges are non-controllable, non-repressible is not true for all males. Male delinquent or criminal behaviors are occasionally punished, but only in some categories of males, in particular males who are victims of racism or belong to economically deprived groups. It's interesting to note that in the southern states of the US during slavery, the cases of black house slaves raping their white mistresses were almost unknown, and the myth of the black man as rapist, a rapist of white women, was propagated only after the end of slavery to underline the danger of having set these men free. But of course, the sexual urges of these men were never considered non-controllable and non-punishable, as long as white men feared they could assault white women. And of course, if white men or black men raped black women, it was not a problem. In other words, the fact that rape is punishable or not depends both on the social and racial category of the rapist and of the woman raped. And it was only when men from lower classes sexually assaulted bourgeois women that their sexual urges were to be controlled and punished, the inverse situation being quite acceptable. In his History of Rape, published in 2000, the French historian Georges Vicarello states that in the whole history of humanity, and until the book was published, there was never a case of a powerful man jailed for rape. 20 years later, and despite Me Too, most men belonging to the dominant classes can still rape women without consequences, penal or even social. Neither Polanski, nor Trump, nor Sept, nor Dominique Strauss-Kahn, nor Patrick Poivre-Daver, etc., spent one single day in jail so far. And of course, only male sexual urges are uncontrollable. Female sexual desires are never presented as urges or needs that cannot be controlled. On the contrary, most cultures implement extensive means, law, institutions, norms, ethics, ideologies to control female sexuality. Slide 5, please. In fact, male urges are not uncontrollable. They are not controlled socially, which is quite different. And they are not controlled because those who have political power don't use it to control themselves, but to control the people they dominate. Whereas these dominated people learn early that they cannot get what they want and internalize that they must accept frustration and control their pulsions if they don't want to run into serious trouble. It's only the dominant classes who can jouir sans entrave, enjoy unrestricted sexual pleasure. The instruments of social and sexual control do not apply to them by definition. The fact that male sexual desires are presented as non-resistible and non-negotiable urges is a characteristic of the sexuality of the dominant classes. Your desire is my command is a statement that applies only to male elites. To be a dominant is to be able to present one's desires as needs and one's needs as rights. What do you think of that? This last sentence. To be a dominant is to be able to present one's desires as needs and one's needs as rights.
Yes, I think that is really interesting because liberal feminists I know have taken up that argument maybe for the last 20 years in the UK and used the argument that there is a right to sex. And I think it's as you're explaining that it's a very useful development of the sort of natural, the idea that men need sex and then they have the right to sex and that society should offer it to them. And I think definitely part of the myth that it's sort of women's duty in a variety of different ways to give their husband sex or their boyfriend sex, and that whole overarching myth, it sort of all knits in together, doesn't it? But it seems as if I suppose it's because of this discourse of human rights. They've put it into the discourse of human rights.
Mm. Well, The notion of sex rights is, of course, inadmissible because sex implies an interaction with a partner. There cannot be a sex right anymore, that there is a right to exploit or enslave others, because there cannot be a right to dispose of somebody else as commodity or property. Sexual urges being only controllable and punishable for the members of dominated classes, since women have been a dominated class for eons, one can assume that the more patriarchal a society is, the more repressed female sexuality. In fact, if male predation is presented as good criminality that cannot and should not be repressed, it's because it plays a key role in male dominance. First, it should be recalled that the notion of crime is not absolute and immutable, but relative. As we have seen for rape, there is no crime per se. The criminal character of an action depends essentially of the social value granted to the victim and to the perpetrator, and of their relative place in a hierarchy. To kill a black man or a woman, and even so a black woman, is not quite the same as killing a white man. To kill an animal is not a crime. Male predation, as long as it concerns only women, is at best formally criminalized. Concretely, and also pedophilia and rape are legally crimes, they are most of the time judged as misdemeanors, where I live at least, and the vast majority of these crimes never even reach a court. On the other hand, when male predators target other men or boys, it's not tolerated so well socially, because feminizing other dominants by penetrating them constitutes a major symbolic attack against male supremacy. The idea that a man can become sexual prey for another man, that it could be penetrated just like a woman, is culturally shocking in patriarchal systems. This anxiety, a provoking male fantasy, the vision of complete sexual anarchy, of a vast indifferentiated orgy where men would penetrate each other, is warded off by homophobia, which strongly stigmatizes these practices. Male sexual aggression must not be directed towards other men, as it would endanger the male solidarity that binds the system. In the US, a woman is raped every 3 minutes, but it doesn't bother many people, except the victims, of course. And it doesn't shake the system. On the contrary, imagine the consequences on male solidarity if these statistics applied to males raping other males. Slide 6, please. In patriarchal societies, laws, institutions, and social practices regulate and organize the unconditional right to sex for men. This right of sexual access is based originally on the two complementary founding institutions of patriarchy, marriage and prostitution, and is completed by the illegal access of rape, incest, and pedophilia, and by this recent invention of patriarchy, the sexual liberation of women. But this right, mostly presented as about guaranteeing the satisfaction of male sexual desires, has another role. Each time a man penetrates a woman, he reasserts himself as dominant, since penetration is the act that defines the penetrated as dominated and the penetrator as dominant. So each penetrative act consolidates the dominant status of the individual male who performs it, but consolidates also the whole system of male power. And each time a woman accepts to be penetrated, she acknowledges objectively her individual status of subordination and collectively her appartenance to the dominated group. Each penetrative act is a sexual expression of the relationship of power between men and women and reinforces it. It reassigns each partner to his proper place, men on top, woman underneath. The Catholic Church prescribes the missionary position as the only hierarchically correct one. Penetrative sex is by definition a hierarchy-producing act and is therefore eminently political since it enacts the founding paradigm of male dominance each time it's performed. Hence the big question, can male dominance be abolished as long as heterosexuality remains the norm? of course, all the sexual practices that degrade, defile, and humiliate women, what pornography is all about, play a major role in this production of hierarchy, as pornographic practices are not really about sex, but about the sexual degradation of women. Pornography is paroxystic hierarchizing, and it's because male dominance is presently questioned that pornography must go further and further into the degradation of women. It's a brutal and most efficient way for men to reassert their rule over women. To reach this aim, one observes a multiplication and diversification of hierarchizing sexual acts in porn. All the female bodily orifices must be invested. New forms of degradation must be invented. The more degrading the sexual acts, the more male supremacy is boosted. Confronted with a relative erosion of patriarchal power, one observes a double-sided attempt to restore the integrity of this power by the far right and religion, whose aim is to bring back women to their traditional role of wives and breeders, and by the left and pornography, whose aim is to promote their role as whores. A characteristic of neo-patriarchy being that the borderline between these two roles is now becoming more and more porous, and that women, just like they are supposed to be working women and mothers as well, are also supposed to be mothers and whores. As we have seen, the message conveyed by the argument of the uncontrollable urge is that male sexual access must be unconditional and without limits, that nothing should and can restrain it, even if it implies the perpetration of violence that are destructive for the victims and very costly for society. Correlatively, this right of sexual access guaranteed to men makes it almost impossible for women to escape penetrative sex. And this question of sexual access is usually presented as a matter of sexual satisfaction for men, but is it really what's at stake? What is at stake? For the sexologists of the 20th century, Havelock Ellis, etc., and Sheila Jeffreys wrote about them, a woman penetrated is by the very fact submitted. That's why they advise men to penetrate their wife as often as possible to keep her pliable and docile. The Mundukurus, Amazonian people, have never heard of sexology, but one of their sayings say the same thing. We train our women with a banana. In fact, if the notion of the uncontrollable urge must be accepted, although potentially criminal, it's because it's an essential element of male supremacy. If male sexual violence must not be repressed, it's because it's construed as guaranteeing female subordination. What's really at stake behind the right of sexual access and the myth of male uncontrollable urge is the enforcement of male power. Slide 7, please. Also, behind this male identification of penetration to submission and possession, there is another version. In the penetrative sexual act, is man really the master and owner of the one penetrated, or is he absorbed, swallowed, devoured in the mysterious darkness of the female womb? Who is really in control here? The loud and arrogant male, or the terrible mother, the one who rules over life and death? Maybe the sexologists who advocated penetration as the ultimate mean for controlling women were whistling in the dark to ward off their fear of the terrible mother. So the myth of male uncontrollable urge, the message sent to men is don't control your urges. On the contrary, let them loose because they are an instrument of your power. In order to secure male hold over them, it's crucial that women are bombarded with penetration. And if the acts that confer dominance and penetration, physical invasion, dominant must be able to effect them as often as possible. Hence, the popularity and intensive consumption of Viagra and pornography, which provoking erection, allow men to maximize their investment of female bodies, thus maximizing their control over women. while pornographic images provide also detailed instruction to operate this investment. In patriarchy, penetrative sex is by excellence the hierarchizing act, and its successful performance implies by definition the pre-existence and confirmation of a hierarchy. Women who are seen as emancipated from masculine control and don't conform to the norms of femininity, and in general the notion of equality in sexual relations, are not exciting for men. Lack of sexually submissive behavior in women is interpreted as rebellious, an attack on males' dominant status. We have heard these men confronted to a woman who is holding her ground, saying that what she needs is a good fuck, which is, these medical figures of female power have been prosecuted because, among other accusations, they were supposed to cause impotence in males, even to steal their penises to keep them in boxes. Slide 8, please. To reduce males to impotence is to steal their power, the loss of sexual power being tantamount to loss of political power. So again, the vital necessity for men to resort to Viagra or pornography to be able to perform sexually as a condition of their supremacy. But considering Viagra's huge sales and male massive consumption of porn, one wonders, if this sexual urge is so strong, why so many drugs and titillating images to stimulate it? Viagra and porn allow men to uphold the fiction of male uncontrollable urge. And what do you think of this idea? Do you think it's right, or believe you can believe in that, or it's not convincing to you? I mean, this
Yeah.
notion that men really since they use so much Viagra and so much porn, I mean, is this urge so strong finally?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes loads and loads of sense, and it's very sort of outside the normal cultural narrative, the way that you're explaining it. Of course, as radical feminists, we've come across these arguments, and particularly, and as you mentioned, Sheila Jeffrey's book, The Spinster and Her Enemies, which sort of outlines the construction or the begin. It explains how men used sexuality and were quite conscious that women would be put back in their place and dominated by men with the use of penetrative sex. I don't know if Marion or Sheila, you want to jump on. If you do, you could unmute yourself and we can have a little chat about what we're thinking about this.
Okay.
Here's Sheila. So, Francine, well, let's see what Sheila has to say,
Please,
and then
yeah.
yeah.
Yes, I mean, I haven't read the whole book, which I would really like to do, but I'm really interested in these quotes, because what's striking me about it is how little any of this is said still. There even within English-speaking feminism, there hasn't been much of it said. Obviously, Andrea Dworkin did say it, and some others have said it. And it was once very well, it was quite understood in radical feminism, the sort of things you're saying. But now there's almost nothing. And there's just all this discussion about sex, supposedly amongst feminism, without any understanding of the fact that it's political and what its political role is. It's just not out there. So it's really good to hear you saying it. And I'm really glad you've written about it. And of course, the reason I was able to write about it in Spinster and Her Enemies and in Anticlimax and so on was that I found the work of the scientists of sex, the sexologists, and it was so absolutely 1000% clear about what sex is for men and what the urge is and why they have to have it and why they have to do what they have to do. Could not be clearer. It was just extraordinary and a gift to see all of that. And it was so absurd too, as well as so insulting, the way in which they wrote, that I was able to set it all out using their work. I don't know how much of the work of sexologists you use in here, or whether you do so at all, or whether you're using other kinds of sources. and perhaps French sources, in fact, that I
Yes.
would not have read and that I don't know about.
Mhm. I do share. Yeah, I use French sources, but I use mostly stuff in English, in fact, most of the time. Marriage is an antique and institutional way to guarantee the sexual.
Francine, I'm just gonna move
Yeah,
me and Sheila off and then call us
oh,
back if
sorry.
you want us because you're going to keep going with the talk, which is
Okay,
brilliant.
okay. Can I go now?
Yeah, do keep going.
Okay. Marriage is an antique institutional way to guarantee this sexual access. In traditional marriages, the man has the right to have sexual relations with his wife, even if she did not want it. He could demand his marital rights by means of rape, if necessary. Rape was therefore an integral part of marriage. This norm was asserted on the first night, the wedding night, which was nothing but a legal rape, and is still the case in a number of cultures. Even in a number of Western cultures, the marital right of men is presented as abolished, but the obligation of sexual intercourse is still legally part of this institution, which is completely illogical. But marriage is not enough. In order for male right of sexual access to be really unlimited, so no woman can escape it, it must be completed by other forms of sexual access, besides prostitution, rape, pedophilia, and incest. First, because these forms of sexual access broaden the gamut of accessible women. In addition to spouses, it includes potentially all women, since rape is by definition gives sexual access to all women, whereas pedophilia and incest extend it to children. Early sexual access to girls, also grooming them for submission to men and prostitution as adults. But also, and because the act of penetration violation defines virility, a sexual relation with women who are apparently consenting, like in marriage, is not superiorizing enough for men. It's essential that on top of consented sexual relations, they also have access to non-consensual sex so they can enjoy the integrality of their power as dominance. The industry of sex dolls has fully understood this, as it produces sex dolls, some looking like girls of 10, and one of the settings of these dolls is rape. The dominant, in order to enjoy his dominance to the full, must force the dominated not just penetrate her body, but break her will as well, having a will of her own being what defines her as a subject. If the woman wants what the dominant wants, sexual relations, then the dominant's will cannot fully assert itself. The present form of marriage, no longer imposed on young girls by their family, but resulting from love, and therefore supposedly consensual, does not procure this feeling of hubristic dominance that only prostitution and rape can give. Men know that the prostituted woman with whom they have sex doesn't want it, otherwise they wouldn't have to pay her. And for a number of Johns, it's precisely the reason for their resorting to prostitution. Prostitution unveils the hidden reality of heterosexual in patriarchy. The violation of women is central to patriarchal sexuality and the patriarchal system in general, but this violation must be presented as consented in modern equal rights societies, since legal sexual interaction in these societies are supposed to be based on consent. In traditional patriarchal societies where male violence expresses itself openly, nobody bothers to pretend that marital sex or prostitution is a choice. Rape guarantees that no woman can escape men's sexual access. Any woman can be raped, even a female president or prime minister, by the sole fact that a man, even if he belongs to the lowest social class, had a penis and therefore has the power to reassert his dominant status by raping her. Rape is an essential element of male power over women. First, because it's used to police women by terrorizing and intimidating, I can't say this word, them. As long as no woman can totally protect herself against this contingency, no one can be said truly equal to men. And not even age can protect women against the possibility of rape. Elderly women in retirement homes are raped. One of my friends on Facebook asked to remove her mother from a retirement home because she was a target of sexual assault by a male employee. This phenomenon of sexual assault of elderly women shows how little rape has to do with sexual desire and how much it has to do with reasserting male power on women by assaulting and hurting them. Rape carves in stone the power asymmetry between men and women. Through rape, the patriarchal man, whose supremacy has been slightly chipped by feminist breakthrough, reconstitutes himself as fully dominant. He experiences full-fledged male dominance as his ancestors knew it. He enters a space of non-right where he can ignore women's humanity and rights, something that can be a tad controversial, at least when it's done explicitly and publicly in Western societies. Johns often say that they don't feel that much pleasure from sex with prostituted women, but that renting a female body gives them a shot of pure dominance, like a shot of heroin is pure bliss for a drug addict. To penetrate a prostitute, to ignore the fact that she doesn't want you, to override her boundaries and humiliate her, to demand dangerous or painful sexual practices, branding her by ejaculating on her like a dog that urinates to mark his territory, this is the apotheotic moment of patriarchal masculinity. Prostitution makes rape easy and without risks by assigning a category of women, economically deprived women, to be raped. It guarantees that any man can rape a woman without any penal or social consequences as long as he has the money. Moreover, a sexual relation with a prostitute maximizes male dominance because it maximizes the hierarchical difference between the sexes. Not only the prostitute is a woman, but she is usually from a lower social class, generally poor, is often an illegal immigrant, and belongs generally to a group victim of racial discrimination. In prostitution, the inequality between men and women is tripled by class and race inequality. This is why men refuse vehemently to be deprived of prostitution. Abolitionists want to deprive them of an essential element of their dominance, because power without abuse of power is not really power. Only prostitution and rape allow men to enjoy the integrality of the right of sexual access that patriarchy grants them. That abolitionists want to deprive them of a piece of this power is resented as an aggression. The penalization of the purchase of sex constitutes an intolerable attack against patriarchal rights, which is way more disturbing for them than the loss of sexual services. When men say, "I am a poor, lonely man, and the only sex I can get is with prostitutes," what these men complaints really mean is, "I cannot get sex with women because I refuse to treat them as human beings, something I don't have to worry about with prostitutes." Slide 9, please. As I said, the myth of male uncontrollable urge is implicitly threatening to women. It reminds them that the threat of rape weighs on them permanently. In order to control women, men must keep them in fear at all times, and that's what the myth of the uncontrollable urge does. If men could control their urges, women would not fear them or not fear them as much. And it's by this very absence of control that males control women. The argument of the non-controllable urges is in fact a mean of control. Male sexuality is constructed to control women socially. The notion that men can control their urges is central to the definition of masculinity as dominance. As we have seen, only dominance can give free rein to their urges. The male right of sexual access to women must therefore be tightly protected against feminist attempts to restrict it, because it's an essential element of male identity and power. In patriarchal ideology, male dominance is justified by the repeated assertion of the natural superiority of men. But if this natural superiority that confers dominance to male must be constantly reasserted, it's because it's a fantasy based on a specious postulate. the confusion between superiority and dominance. In the patriarchal system, men are not superior because they possess more than women qualities that confer objective superiority, intelligence, instruction, courage, creativity, ethics, etc., but because it's a fact of being dominant that proves superiority by itself. In other words, one is superior because one oppresses certain categories of human beings. One is superior because one is dominant and not dominant because superior. In fact, the personality traits that permit a group to dominate another have nothing to do with objective superiority. On the contrary, what procures dominance to an oppressor is the lack of some qualities, lack of empathy, of altruism, of ethics, of humanity, even of intelligence, plus the use of deception and violence. Patriarchal men dominate women not by their superior qualities, but by their very moral inferiority, their lies and their crimes. It's thanks to their intellectual and moral inferiority, proudly claim that they rule the world. Think of Elon Musk saying that there is too much empathy in Western societies, and of a number of other tech bros declaring that our societies are becoming too feminine, a code word for too much welfare and not enough capitalist competition and violence. Slide 10, please.
Oh,
Male superiority must be constantly reasserted because it's a sham. As underlined before, the basic patriarchal strategy to make it appear as unchangeable is to naturalize it. But if it was really natural, there would be no need to assert it constantly. In its assertion to male uncontrollable urges, patriarchy says contradictorily to women, our dominance through sexuality is unchangeable, but don't ever try to change it. Likewise, if female submissiveness was natural, there would be no need to constantly condition, control, and punish women at all times to make sure they comply. Male superiority is an assertion devoid of factual content, which operates as a tautology. Patriarchy creates reality through enunciation, as it has the power of naming, which is part of its political power. We are superior because we have the power to assert that we are superior. We have authority, so everything we say goes. In conclusion, men who pretend they have uncontrollable urges know exactly what they are doing. They know that patriarchal masculinity is in itself criminal, and that it's precisely this criminality which is the source of their power. Uncontrollable urge justifies the right to sex, and the right to sex means the right to rape. Behind the argument of the uncontrollable urge, it's not nature which is speaking, but patriarchy. Any questions? Sorry, my voice is really...
yes, I've got quite a few questions, and we'll pick some up from the chat. And maybe if Sheila or Marion want to come on, that would be really good. Some of the things that I was thinking an additional thing I was thinking, stimulated by what you're saying, is that because our voices, radical feminist voices, are very, very, very marginal in society at large, the normal sort of upbringing of young girls is the grooming into the consent and fear, and through things like pop music, which is completely a form of grooming, of saying that what women want is sex, and a bit the uncontrollable male urge, but that women really want it. And then the medical establishment bombarding young girls with contraceptives as if that is a normal thing that they're going to be doing, penetrative sex. And then in schools, girls are taught that, or the almost inevitability of having a heterosexual relationship and having penetrative sex. And they're sort of said, yeah, but be careful, you need to make sure it's consensual and it's not abusive. But what about our message is you just don't need to do it. Just don't do it. And also the message about the actual real implication that it is assertion of male dominance, that you never hear that in the mass media, in the medical establishment, in schools. So this message just is not there. And I think that's one of the ways that young women are completely betrayed by older women, not us, but most older women, the whole of society, because nobody's telling them the central thing that they feel in their bodies. And they know something's amiss. And I mean, when I talk to young women who have had sexual relations with young men, you can see that they know something's up. They're trying to do what they've been expected to do. They've tried to participate in society. Nobody's told them this is a disaster, don't do it. I mean, we're trying to tell them. And then I'll just add one thing, and then hopefully Sheila will come on. Another thing that I remember a young woman talking to me. She went to a networking event for getting jobs in London, and there were some boys her age, and they were all probably, let's say, 18. And there was an old man there trying to get her drunk. So he kept on giving her drinks, and she was going, no, I don't want them. And then one of the boys said, look, she doesn't want the drinks. And the old man said, oh, I was just trying to give you a hand. And what he was trying to do is, so the old man was like trying to help the young man get the girl drunk so he could then rape her or force her into sex. And I thought, this is just so vile that the patriarchy works that way, that older men think it's fun to, or helpful to a younger man to get a young woman drunk. And the young man thought it was bad. But anyway.
You have noticed that, but I noticed for instance, in teen magazines, a trend to normalize anal sex, like how to do it, so that it's no problem, detailed instructions. I would like to know if you have noticed that as well.
Absolutely. It's about 10 years ago it started. This anal sex thing, it became
But
normalized.
more now. Really
Absolutely.
now, a lot of articles about how to do it, so that everything is okay and blah, blah, blah.
And it's gaslighting because it's just horrifically pointless.
It's disgusting, terrible.
Dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Sheila?
Please, Sheila.
Yes, I mean, one of the things that's coming out in the chat that I find really, there's lots of things coming out. Somebody's just mentioned the whole concept of losing virginity. Well, of course, that doesn't exist for lesbians. What it does tell us is about the politics of putting the penis in the vagina, which is absolutely fundamental to male domination. And I mean, the whole concept of virginity is so strange, so cruel, and so nasty. It really tells us pretty much everything we need to know about this discussion, really. But I have to say that when I used to teach this stuff, I used to teach my students that I think there were 5 good reasons for giving up, even if they chose to remain heterosexual, penis in vagina sex. And I mean, obviously, the first one was the need for contraception, which is very, very harmful to women. It harms women's health in all kinds of ways, creates anxiety. There may always be the need for abortion, which of course is a very severe problem for women. It's not just something you can just, deal with just like anything. So contraception is huge. It seems absolutely normal to me to just give it up, because there's lots of other practices that heterosexuals can do. Of course, it doesn't work that way, because for the men, it's absolutely fundamental that they stick the penis in the vagina. They can't accept anything else as sex. And anyway, women might have to take the penises in their mouths or do something unpleasant in recompense, I guess. So that's always a little bit of a problem. But it makes no sense to have to go on doing something that causes women the huge problem of the possibility of becoming pregnant. Another reason I gave was that it pins women down. It's very difficult to do very much, and men do pin them like flies on a board with the penis in the vagina. It's very, very difficult to get pleasure. Women have to wriggle around. The sexologists talk about women wriggling around because there's no direction to women's organ of pleasure, which is the clitoris. In fact, it can be completely sidestepped. I also used to say that a problem with the practice is that it's symbolic of dominance and submission. And that's one of the reasons why men like it, not just that it's the penis in the vagina, but the whole position in which they like it to take place and so on. So there's so many reasons not to do that. And indeed, I do remember when I was still heterosexual in the mid 1970s, I had a male partner, and we decided, okay, we simply wouldn't do that practice. And fortunately, I became a lesbian quite quickly afterwards. But many, many women, feminists at that time in London, all over the UK, gave up penis and vagina sex for all of these reasons. And yet, there's still huge defense of it. And that's very surprising to me. I mean, there's a defense of it now, and there's no criticism of it now because we don't have a movement now. We don't have a discussion of these very profound and important things, such as sexual penetration of women. I wrote a whole book about this, of course, with penile imperialism, in which women talk about how dreadful it is, particularly when they're older and they absolutely don't want to do this practice of having to do it. The very good thing is that there's just a report out today in the newspapers in America of the numbers of women of middle age and in their prime who are simply not having sexual relationships with men anymore. They give them up. They say they absolutely cannot bear the men, and so they give them up. Nothing bad happens to them, of course. So that's one of the things I was thinking is we need to have that simple discussion. And it's clear from the discussion in the chat that these days it's not going on. Why women can't just give it up, do not just give it up. Well, of course, the men will be absolutely furious. That's one of the main reasons why they cannot say, I don't want to do this practice. I would rather do something else. But also, I'm interested in why it is still the case, and it's always been the case, of course, over the last 40, 50 years, that many women find it very, very difficult to criticize the practice of coitus. I guess it's, completely enforced by sexology, by sex therapy, by the popular culture, by the men and their fury, the men and their absolute fury. And so women are not really able to be very critical of that. And I guess once you've been doing it 20, 30, 40 years of life, and goddess forgive me, even longer than that for some women who go on until their 80s and so on, with various aids to enable them to get the penis into the vagina. But once you've been doing that, it must be very, very difficult to suddenly criticize it. We did, of course, in the 70s, and many of us gave it up and then became lesbians and so on, but we hadn't been doing it for 50 years. If you have, maybe it's hard to have a criticism of it. Anyway, that'll do for now. But I'm very much enjoying the discussion in the chat as well as this webinar. Ovular. Back to you, Francine.
Well, for instance, there are signs, which are interesting. I saw in the Guardian of this morning, I think, an article about women that just are giving up on dating, which is not quite the same as giving up on heterosexuality, but it's one step closer. And they say one of the reasons they give to for their giving up dating is that in fact it's the heavy consumption of porn by men, which makes it which is a major problem in their previous relationship. And so, of course, the man keeping, the job that it is for a woman to keep a man, and just the little the fact that men are not sharing anything or hardly anything about domestic work. So I find it interesting that apparently more and more women were giving up, according to this article in The Guardian, just stop dating. And, it's kind of a trend also, I think.
Yeah. The women are saying that they just cannot bear all the men's addictions, particularly their addictions to pornography and their addictions to all kinds of other things. They cannot bear having to look after them all the time, and the men never look after the women. So how can they bear to be in relationships with them? But it's wonderful. I mean, it's not as if they've necessarily read any feminism or that they are feminists. It's just an absolutely practical rejection of them. They're just
Indeed.
saying,
Mhm.
stop it. And that's it.
But it's a
I mean,
step, it's a
it's
step
a step.
forward.
And
Mhm.
it's not just happening in the States. Women are
Yeah.
absolutely fed up. And it's mostly, of course, porn use that in the end has pushed them over the edge. They really cannot cope with what the men are doing here.
Well, I've had some of my younger friends told me that in fact they gave up their sexuality because it's only about porn. There is no possibly, I mean, this intercourse, sexual intercourse is impossible without, they have to satisfy porn demands from men and really disgusting or painful stuff. So they just stopped altogether because it was only now they couldn't find a man who didn't ask for porn practices when they had, when they dated and had sexual intercourse with a man for the first time.
Yes. And
It's very telling.
it's very, very different now because, of course, pornography has created a very, very vicious sexuality amongst men. It was always problematic and about dominance and so on and so on. But what they're now demanding, the strangulation, the
Yeah.
anal sex, and so on, it's horrifying. But back in the day when I was heterosexual, as I remember, what the men wanted was just very straightforward, just put the penis in for a few minutes and that's it, not a big problem. But strangulation was not on the cards. And I do remember in my first sexual relationship with a man, we bought a book called Sex Manners for Men. And we looked at it together, and there were diagrams with the clitoris in there. And we talked about this and talked about what it meant and so on. I mean, what a different world from the world of pornography. But also at that time, back in the 1970s, one of the demands of the women's liberation movement was a self-defined sexuality for women. That was in the 1970s. Can you imagine that? We are so far from that now. We're on another planet where all that women are having to experience is a horrendously woman-hating, porn-created sexuality. We could never have imagined this. We thought it was all bad enough as it was, just pornography, which was pictures of women's genitals and so on. So we are in a very, very different world, and I presume that is the reason why such large numbers of women are starting to just give up men altogether. They just cannot stand it. They just cannot stand it. But who would have imagined we would have been in this place back in the 1970s when we thought the world would change, that men would be changed, they'd be forced to change, pornography would be abolished. I was involved in the first anti-porn group in Britain and we thought we could end it. We actually thought we could end it. We have been absolutely rolled over in the tidal wave of pornography and are now completely subject to it. So I am absolutely delighted that you've done this book, Francine. And I'm hoping that it will really help feminists in France. I'm absolutely sure that it will, because as you
One
say,
last
there
thing
hasn't
also,
been
I
enough.
noticed a trend to normalize strangulation, which is, absolutely horrible. And again, don't be afraid, girls, do it, blah, blah, blah.
I've also, oh, sorry, I think hopefully I'm not. I also think that part of the grooming and normalization of this subjugation of women via sexuality is achieved through femininity. So, for instance, if you watch the Women's World Cup football, which some of us who are watching soccer, they're allowed to play soccer, but they have to have blonde ponytails that bob up and down in a sort of pornified way. Now, the females. And when they go into do the afterwards to discuss the football match, they're wearing really high heels, porn high heels, which is part of this subjugation and the whole image of porn, which nobody used to wear 20, 30 years ago. No women were, well, they wouldn't wear them on television. But so the TV is sort of grooming young women to say, yes, you could do some sport, but then go home or to the bedroom, and then you're going to be a sexual object. So you need to learn those things. And then the horror of it is the media going along with it, and older women are going along with it. And I mean, I once had an argument with a male-female couple I was talking to. I can't remember, it's probably not really about this, but the woman said, look, we're not going to get to the end of this, but what I want to say is I love sex with Brian, or who was sitting there. I love sex. And that was like a discussion stopper. She wanted to say, I love being subordinated by my husband or partner, and that's going to stop you. It was like complete non sequitur out of nowhere. She wanted to say where she stood in relation to the patriarchy, and she said it by saying she loves penis in vagina sex. She consents to it and loves it. Sort of, wow, that really is central. And I think so. Your book really, absolutely,
Yes.
is going to be helpful because we need to attack that.
Thanks.
Well, it looks like we've come to the end. I shouldn't say the last word. Francine, you say the last word.
No, fine. No, nothing to add. Thanks very much to all.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
bye-bye.
Yeah, and it's lovely to have Sheila there because of, you've written so much, Sheila. And then Francine, we've got this lovely book in French now, really useful.
I'm absolutely delighted that it is there. Absolutely delighted.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I'm delighted about is some of the wording, some of the phrases and sentences that you've translated into English are new to me. That's a new way of saying it, which really, we can get them as little clips. So I'll try and cut some of this into clips so we can maybe get the message out, these pithy statements of this is really what's happening. I think that's why it's important that we just keep on talking and sharing and developing our ideas, because sometimes we come up with these phrases that really can get through. So thank you so much.